Okay, so today for this discussion, it will be about the soil physical properties. So we'll have a quick overview of the learning outcomes before proceeding to the topic proper. Okay, so at the end of this lesson, in terms of the soil physical properties, it is expected that you will be able to define soil texture, structure, density, consistency, and soil color. Next is explain the influence of soil texture, structure, density, and water holding capacity on growth of the plants. And lastly is describe the soil physical properties and how they indicate various soil conditions. Okay, so for the topics, for the soil physical properties, there are lots of soil physical properties. Pero we will tailor down our discussion sa 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lang. So you have your soil texture, soil structure, soil density, soil water, soil consistency, and your soil color. Okay. When you talk about physical properties of the soil, basically it just refers to the physical structure of your soil. No? Usually on its tawag dito, arrangements ng mga aggregates and components of your soil. So first things first, we will talk about soil texture. So by definition, soil texture refers to relative proportion of the different soil particles, namely sand, silt, and your clay. So when you talk about relative proportion, ibig sabihin, gaano kadami yung sand compared to silt and your clay. So we have three kasi major soil separates. So what are those soil separates? This refers to the size groups of mineral particles less than 2 millimeters in diameter or the size groups that are smaller than your gravel. Now, these soil separates refers to your sand, silt, and clay. So they are around less than 2 millimeters in size. Now, the distribution of these soil separates dictates your soil texture. So, soil texture is important because it influences the amount of water that the soil can hold. So, your soil texture kasi is used in reference to the size of your soil particles. And in terms of its importance, the rate of water movement through the soil is determined by your soil texture. Also, how workable or how fertile your soil is. Why? Because the smaller the particles are there in your soil, the larger kasi the internal surface area there is. Similarly, the smaller particles in the soil, the more smaller particles are there in your soil, the more water and nutrients your soil can retain. So, how do we obtain your soil separates or the proportion of your soil separates? You get soil sample. So, what do we mean by soil sample? It is a combination of at least two separates that then describes the classes of your soil texture. So, yung soil sample, it can be obtained via an auger, like you dig sa soil, or pwede you dig a certain depth of the soil and then you obtain soil sample via shovel method. Okay, so we have discussed the definition of soil separate. So, atong isa-isahon, unsa tong mga descriptions sa ato ang sand, silt, and clay. So when you talk about sand particles, among the three soil separates, sand is the largest. So pinakamalaki si sand, followed by your silt, and then lastly is your clay. So sand particles are characterized with a diameter of 2.05 millimeters. So super liit, 2 millimeters. So your sand particles can be seen through your naked eye kasi pag 2 millimeters, wala kay ruler around. Kamay, medyo, it's not that small compared to your clay. So sand particles are characterized to be coarse, gritty, or abrasive when rubbed between your fingers. So I'm pretty sure that all of you have felt sand particles like sa mga dagat or sa mga construction. So when you rub sand particles in your fingers, hapnot siya or it feels abrasive. Now, sand particles are characterized to be non-sticky and non-plastic when wet, with a source coming from your primary minerals, and its shape is characterized to be cubic to spherical in shape. So muni ang electron micrograph of sand particles, medyo cubic to spherical in shape. Now, the non-sticky and non-plastic behavior of your sand particles is brought about by its low porosity, low water holding capacity, and low nutrient holding capacity. Why low water holding capacity? Let's say, for example, in your soil, uh, di ba, sa dagat, pag makakita ka og mga sand particles, dali man siya mahunog. It cannot hold that much water. So that's why your sand particles are non-sticky and non-plastic when wet because it is characterized to have a low water holding capacity. Similarly, it cannot hold that much nutrients as well. So if na ay soil nutrients, say for example, you put in fertilizers or soil amendments in a sand particle, or I mean in a soil with lots of sand particles, and then you introduce water or you introduce rain, say for example, dali siya mag-leach out. So, kay dili man kayo ka-hold og nutrients ang imong sand particles. Next, you have your silt particles. Your silt particles naman, they are next to sand in terms of size. So it is characterized to have a 0.05 to 0.002 millimeters in diameter. Now, unlike your uh, sand particles that is coarse or abrasive when rubbed, your silt particles feel smooth like powder. So, smooth siya, more siya ka ng baby powder. Still, its source is your or are your primary minerals, and its shape is cubic to spherical in shape. So your sand and your silt particles, they are closely uh, uh, similar in terms of shape and your mineral composition. So same lang sila o shape and the mineral composition, which is your primary minerals. Asa sila nag-vary? So sand and silt are distinct from each other in terms of their size kasi pag mas malaki, yun yung si sand. And pag less than na lang gani sa kadtong lower limit sa dimensions ni sand, that's now your silt particles. Pero still, your silt particles is the same with your sand particles. It is neither sticky when wet. So, dili kayo siya ka-hold gyapon og moisture, and similarly, your nutrient. So, it has low water holding capacity and low nutrient capacity. Pero, dili pasabot na uh, they cannot hold that much water. Disadvantage na din sila. Pero asa man sila advantageous sa imuhang soil or sa imong lupa. When your land contains a portion of sand and silt particles, it is easy to till. So, dali siya bungkalon, and it is characterized to have or promote good aeration. Kasi via the ventilation. Kay, syempre, it cannot hold that much water. So, if dali ra siya, di ba, buhaghag man ang characteristics sa imong sand particles. Lastly, you have your clay particles. Now, your clay, it is very different from your sand and silt particles because it came from your secondary minerals na. Galing sa imong primary minerals, your primary minerals underwent your chemical weathering na nakay secondary minerals. So your clay particles are characterized to have 0.002 millimeters in diameter. Now, in terms of its shape, mora siya og plateau. So it is plate shaped with some tubular uh, variants rather than spherical. Kay spherical man to imuhang sand and silt particles. So this your clay particles are very small in size with a large surface area per gram. Now, aside from its shape and size, your clay particles vary from your sand and silt because since it is very small, the large surface area of your clay particles allows it to absorb more water and nutrients. So it has a high total porosity, high water holding capacity, and high nutrient holding capacity ang imuhang clay particle since it can hold much water and your nutrients. However, pag soil man nga wait, soil that are also abundant in clay particles, although it can hold water and nutrients, it is difficult to till or it has poor aeration. So, what is an example of a clay soil or a soil that contains a larger proportion of your clay particles is kaning lupa na to diri sa Marfori. So, very sticky siya, bantok. Bantok ba ang term? Bantok siya kapag itil. So it can hold water, yes. It has a high nutrient holding capacity. Pero kapag nalabian po ang clay particles, lisod na siya i-till and poor aeration, so compacted ang imo soil. So that's why we have to strike a balance sa imuhang land preparation. Okay, so sa photo here, it shows the electron micrographs of your clay particles. So it is plate-like in shape. Now, how do we determine your soil texture? So, kapag sa field, we have, you can have two methods kapag sa dili mo siya i-quantify. It can be via fill method or pwede po siya your roll method. Now, kapag fill method, what you will do is that you rub moist soil between your fingers and you estimate the characteristics of the dominant soil separate. So, simply just i-feel lang nimo ang imong soil na naa. So, dapat moist ang imong soil because kapag dry, wala man good kay ma-feel. So, according to uh, sa fill method, sandy soils will feel gritty and rough kapag imo siyang i-rub, while silty soils feel smooth and powdery kapag medyo moist siya, while clayey soils are plastic and sticky. Kapag i-determine mo ang soil texture via your fill method. We also have another method na more reliable compared to your fill method. Kasi, pag fill method man God, it is prone to, tawag dito, ah, medyo subjective siya. Kay, lain-lain man o texture ang palad or palm sa kada person. Say for example, one person can say, no, it feels sticky sa ako, pero sa the other person, it feels smooth. So, another method is your roll method kapag sa field ka. So, what happens in roll method? You get a small quantity of soil and you moisten it. Dili pod ka ng super wet na pod siya. Tama lang na moisture. You moisten it with water and knead it to the consistency of a putty to determine how well the soil forms rods or ribbons or how it remains intact when bent into loop or your uh, ribbons. So, Kapag ang imuhang soil sample, so you get a certain soil sample and then bason lang nimo tubig enough to knead it like a dough, like kana sa pan or kana sa mga puti sa mga construction. Now, kapag ang imuhang soil kay dili siya mag-form into rod, like kanang dili gid siya man-knead, sa, more or less sandy soil na siya, while medium textured soil such as loam and silt loam can form rods but they break easily when a loop is formed. So there is a picture, there is a imuhang kani nga picture. So kapag loam ang imuhang soil, medyo buhaghagon siya. Ang ihang ribbon nga ma-form kay less than 2.5 centimeters lang. Kapag maka-form siya og ribbon pero medyo taas na ribbon pero dili siya ma-roll, more or less clay loam ang imuhang soil. While kapag fully nimo ma-bend ang imuhang soil sample, more or less you have a clay type of soil. So clay soils form a continuous rod kasi which can be molded a ring without cracking or breaking. While again, medium textured soils, they can form rods, but they break easily when a loop is formed. So only clay soils, katong daghan gyud og proportion of clay, can be formed into a rod without breaking. So that's your roll method. So again, fill method and roll method are used kapag dito ka sa field and you need um, direct na estimate sa imuhang soil texture. We also have mechanical analysis. Now, in terms of mechanical analysis, kanina siya ang kailangan na og lab na mga laboratory equipment. So, in mechanical analysis, same ra gihapon sa previous ng katong roll and fill method, you get a soil sample sa field. However, dalon na nimo imong soil sample sa laboratory for analysis. So, mechanical analysis, it determines the size range of particles present in a soil expressed as a percentage of the total dry weight. So you have two methods. You have sieve analysis and hydrometer analysis. Now, in sieve analysis, you get sieves or salaan. So, sieves with various grades na mo na siya grano. Like, same sa sieves nga ginagamit sa floor na po yung mga salaan nga dagko grains. Now, in sieve analysis, it is particularly helpful in separating silt and sand particles, pero it is unsatisfactory for separating your clay particles because ang tendency kasi kapag sieve analysis lang, like isalaon lang nimo siya and you determine lang katong simple na size, like kapag ingon ani ang size sa sieve less than 2 millimeters pero greater than 0.05, kuha na siya, sand na siya. Your clay particles kasi, they have a tendency to stick or mupilit siya sa imong sand and silt. Like dili nimo dali ma-separate imong clay particles from your sand and silt. So what happens in sieve analysis? There's a high chance or it is very likely na only sand and silt ang imong na-data. Pero in terms of the clay component, dili nimo ma-quantify pila ang proportion sa imuhang clay particles. Now, what is the better option? That's your hydrometer analysis. So, what happens in hydrometer analysis? It can analyze or it can get the proportion of much smaller soil separates. So, for particle sizes smaller than 0.075 in diameter. So what happens in your hydrometer method? Usually, you get a 50 grams of air dry soil. So what is air dry soil? After getting your soil sample sa field, you process it sa oven. I-oven mo imong soil for around 100 degrees Celsius for around 24 hours. And sa laboratory, you get your graduated cylinder as shown in the photo. So you get a certain amount of tawag dito, water. So kunyari mga 500 ml. So you mix it with a dispersing agent. Now the dispersing agent, usually it is sodium pyrophosphate solution. You mix it with your water, your dispersing agent, and then ibutang nimo imuhang soil for about 12 hours para mag-disperse ang imuhang soil. Now, the soil water suspension is placed in a metal cup with bubbles, and then you stir it, and then you measure the levels of your soil. So, basta after your hydrometer analysis, it gives you an idea sa pila ang proportion sa imong sand and silting. Say for example, 30% imong sand, 20% imong silt, 100%, 50% ang imong clay. So, unsa man imong data nga na-obtain sa imong mechanical analysis, you use it para sa imong textural triangle. So what is the textural triangle? The soil texture triangle is one of the tools that is used to visualize and understand the meaning of the soil texture name. So it is a diagram that shows how each 12 textures is classified based on the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. So each side sa triangle corresponds to the percentage of sand, silt, and your clay. So sa baba, you have your sand particles. Wait, can I highlight? Lang ah. So you have your sand particles, you have your silt particles, and you have your clay. So what happens in your textural triangle? Dili ta mag-una wait lang, ni sand. So kapag na kay soil texture triangle, ang pinakaubos ana kani si sand nimo. Okay, so depende siya 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%. So imong lantawon sa imong texture triangle kay pa ingon na. Ingani ang orientation sa imuhang sand. Next is your silt. Ang silt di ari sa rightmost part sa imong textural triangle. So, iyang orientation pod kay pa 10, 20, 30, and so on. And then lastly is your clay na side. So, sa imong clay na side, ningani po niyang orientation. 10, para straight. Again, sa clay kay paana, sa imong silt paana, and then sa imong sand kay pa ganon. Okay, so, unsa yung ginapasabot ani imong soil texture triangle? Um, ang imo man kung proportion, when you talk about proportion, iyang total kay 100%. So, kaning sand, silt, and clay, pwede na siya nga 100% sand ang imong soil. Kasi pasabot sa 100% sand ang imong soil. Walay clay and wala siya silt. And what if imuhang sand kay 30%? So most likely, 70%, 30 plus 70 is 100. Always na siya mag-total ang sand, silt, and clay to 100. Dili na siya pwede maglapas og 100. Kay proportion man good siya. Wala siya gaingon sa weight. It talks about the proportion. Okay, so unsay pasabot sa imong soil texture triangle? Each side man god depende sa proportion kung unsa siya kadaghanon, mag-dictate siya kung unsa ang imuhang soil texture. Like say for example, sige, let's have an example. Diri ta mag-una sa imuhang sand na soil. So diri imuhang sand na soil. So your sand soil contains the around 85% or more sand. So asa man ka maglantaw kung may 85% sand. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 85. More or less, 85%. Dili de 80, tara de 80. 85% sand. So, kung may yung 85% sand, most likely, ang imuhang clay kay 5% lang or ang imong silt kay 5% lang or so on and so forth. Now, your loamy sand, asa imong loamy sand, napo dire, depende na siya sa proportion. Basta kung ang sa soil texture triangle, you are given a data kung pila ang percentage sa imong sand, silt, and clay, and then, ang total na nila kay always 100. So, unsay example, it is best explained by an example. So, may example ta sa imong soil texture triangle. Okay, so say for example, you have data na based sa mechanical analysis, ang naa daw kay you have 40% sand and then 24% clay and 36% silt. Kung pangutan na karon kay unsa imong soil texture. So, unsay una buhaton sa soil texture triangle? Kung unsay nauna sa data, unsay una giingon is your sand. So, 40% sand. So, kung mayon og 40% sand, dito ka maglantaw sa sand. Diri ka na portion. Dili sa ka maglantaw sa silt and clay. Dili sa ka sa lower portion kung si sand. So, ingon siya 40% sand. So, asa man ang 40% ni sand ani? Kani ang 40% na sand. So, what you will do is you form a line. You strike a line. Yeah. Okay, you strike a line nga 40%. So, asa man ang 40% ani? Kani siya. Mo ni siya imuhang 40%. So, you form a line. Ano siya mo? Wait lang. I'm trying to make it nga magtandi sila. Okay. So, mag-form kag line. Muna siya ang imuhang 40% na sand. Approximate. Now, next is 24% na clay. So, kung maingon og clay, dili na ka maglantaw diri sa ubos. Asa ka maglantaw? Dari na ka maglantaw ni clay. So, unsa may orientation sa number ni clay? Paingon na ni si clay. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70, 80, 90, 100. So, diri na side imuhang clay. So, kung mayroon kang 24% asa may 24% ka na. Kani ang 20 ni clay, kani ang 25. So, more or less na diri imuhang 24% na clay. And then you form a line. So, mo ni siya ang 24% na 24% na clay. Unsay next? You have 36% na silt. So, asa man si silt? Tora si silt, diri na ka na side sa triangle. So, unsa may orientation sa number ni silt? Patakilid sila. So, asa ka maglantaw nga linya? Kani nga linya. 10, 20, 30. So, imong lantaw na linya, kay kani nga nakaslanting. So, kung yung 30%, 36% na silt, more or less, na diri 30 man kani 40, so most likely kani 35, atras ta gamay para ma-36 siya. And then, you draw a line. Okay. So, after drawing your data, magtagbo na sila. Dapat yun na sila magtagbo. Kaya ang total manggod ani nila, 44 plus 6 is 10. 4 plus 1, 5 plus 2, 7 plus 3, 100. So, a total of 100%. So, 100% yun na sila tanan. So, ang point kung asa magtagbo ang imuhang um, soil separates mo to siya ang soil texture sa imong soil sample. So, asa man sila nagtagbo? Dili sila nagtagbo sa imong loam. So, pasabot, kani nga soil is loamy ang iyahang soil texture. So again, what you should know is that kani sila 20, 40, 24, 36. Kung imo siyang i-plot sa imong soil texture triangle, makahatag na siya kung unsay soil texture nga naa sa imong sample. So pwede to sila nga duha lang magtagbo, pero as much as possible ikatulo ang tulo jud na para for backup data. So at least kailangan kag at least duha ka data like 40% na sand, 24% na clay. Enough na siya para maka-graph ka. So again, kung mo lantaw ka, isa-isa sa nimo diri ka una ni sand or unsay una nga data, next is si clay and then your silt. Okay, but let's have another example. Let's have another example sa imuhang soil texture triangle. So you should be able to learn how to use your soil texture triangle. Okay. So say for example, you have 20% sand, 80% silt. So 20% sand and 80% silt, total na sila to 100. So asa man si clay? Clay is therefore 0. Okay. 20 plus 80 is 100. So, atong data lang karon is you have 20% sand and 80% silt. So, unsay una buhaton? Kinsay na una sa data? You have your sand. So, mag-una taglantaw ni sand which is na dere. And then, unsay orientation ni sand siyang number patakilid. So, 20% sand. So, you graph it. 20% sand. 80% silt. So, asa man si silt? So, dako na tag-chance kung 20% ang imong 20% ang imong sand, most likely, ang sa imong soil texture, 20%. So, 20%. So, most likely, kung 20% ang imong sand, either silt loam siya, clay loam siya, or clay ang imong sample. Or pwede po siya mahimong silty clay loam. So, og silty clay. Na kay idea, based lang sa imong data nga 20% sand, nara diri mag-fall ang imong soil texture. Next is you have 80% silt. So, kung 80% silt, tura imong silt, patakilid ang iyang data which kani si 80. Lang. Hindi siya mo tandi. So, 80% sale. So, asa sila nag-meet? So, nag-meet sila around diri na part sa imuhang um, soil texture. Wala lang sila nag-meet kaayo sa drawing kay dili siya accurate ang pagka-line. Pero na sila sa boundary sa imuhang silt and silt lobe. Now, what will you do kapag ingon na niya mahitabo kung na siya sa boundary? Usually, mulantaw ka sa pa-right. So, pwede nimo ma-classify imong soil as silt. Kay 80% nasulod man siya diri sa imong silt na component. Silt ba? Tama. Or pwede siya silt loam. Next is another example. Pwede ka um, silt loam to siya, silt loam. Rather. Okay, lower limit naman siya sa silt. Okay, next is what if ang imong soil kay, let's say, 30% clay and 30% clay, 60% silt, and 10% sand. So 30% clay, 60% silt, and 10% na sand. Okay, so asa mag-una, lantawon kung unsay gihatag sa data. So nauna is your clay. So let's check clay first. Asa man si clay, ani nga portion, paingon na ni si clay. So 30% clay. So you form a line. You form a line, mo na siya si clay. Next is 60% na silt. So, asa man 60% na silt, diba? After that, you form a line. And then, for checking purposes, i-check na to kung mag-meet ba yun sila sa 10% na sand. So, 10% na sand na adhering. So, asa sila nag-meet? Dili sila nag-meet sa imuhang silty clay loam. So, therefore, ang imong soil texture is silty clay loam. So, lahi si silty clay loam sa silty clay or silt loam o sa loam. So, that's how you use your soil texture triangle. Always na sila mag-add up ang proportion sa 100. Dili na siya mahitabo nga mula pa sa 100. So, for instance, 100% ang imong sand. So, more or less, sand ang imong soil. And then, zero na dahil imong clay and silt. So, dili pasabot nga dapat na agad present ang imong tulo ka soil separates. It could be duha, ang naalang, or tulo in various proportion. Okay, so using this soil texture triangle, ang loam na soil, which is the very ideal soil, kay tama ang proportion sa imuhang sand, silt, and clay. It can hold moisture, it can hold nutrients, pero enough po nga to promote good aeration sa imong soil. Okay, so what are the importance of your soil texture? The knowledge of soil texture and crop requirement of soil enables the growers to select suitable soils and land for the crop. So, soil texture affects the infiltration and drainage because these properties depends on whether it is sandy, silt, or clay soil. So, in terms of infiltration, unsa kapaspas mo naog ang imong water sa imong soil, siyempre, pag clay soil, baba yung infiltration because mag-hold man og water dayon ng imuhang clay soil. So, sandy soils and siltic soils promote better infiltration and drainage. Again, we have to strike a balance. Also, the rate of nutrient leaching depends on the rate of water infiltration. For example, clay soils have the best holding ability for water and chemical nutrients. Next is at the ease at which soils can be worked. Clay soils are more difficult to till than your sandy soils. Again, because it can hold much water, medyo, it is more compact compared to your sandy soils. And then Lastly, your soil texture aids in selecting suitable soils for specific crop and accompanying management strategies. So it is important to characterize your soil texture para kabalo ka sa mga intervention ng imong ibutang simulan. Say for example, sandy ang imong soil, so good yung aeration, so you amend it by adding clay soils and other substances na kamagdugang kung saan. Also, there are crops that are suitable for sandy soils, and there are crops that can thrive in clay-rich soils. So it depends on the crop suitability. So farmers would be able to know the management practices suitable or the soil types in their land, especially in terms of fertilization, irrigation, and organic materials na incorporation. So that's your soil texture. Next is your soil structure. So what do we mean by soil structure? Soil structure is defined in terms of the arrangement of the soil particles arranged in two secondary particles called beds or aggregates. So in other words, soil structure is defined as the organization of your sand, silt, clay, including your humus particles, into somewhat stable groupings called beds or aggregates. So from your soil separates your sand, silt, and clay, individual to sila. You also have your humus or your organic matter. Now, your soil structure depends on the arrangement na dayon sa imong mga grouping sa imong soil separates called secondary particles called beds or aggregates. Now, your soil structure is important in agriculture from the point of view that well-aggregated soils is often well-drained. So, soils with good structure are often well-drained with good permeability of water, air, and roots. So, good structure, soils with good structure are well aggregated. They have balanced macro and micropores. Micropores is used for water storage, while macropores aids in drainage, aeration, and growth of roots. Now, good structure soils are characterized to be easily tillable with high porosity and low bulk density. So, well aggregated soils are easily worked or tilled and thus serves better erosion controls. And uh, well aerated soils have good structure because of the numerous macropore spaces created by the existence of numerous lines or weakness between aggregates or beds. So kapag poor ang structure sa imong soil, usually it is characterized to be massive, very compact. Wala siya lines wherein pwede siya mag-separate. Very bulky jud ang imong soil, or it can have no structure at all. And dominantly, micropores ang naa sa imuhang pore structure. So, pore structure have poor drainage, poor aeration, and poor root growth. Okay. Kapag massive, very poor ang drainage. Mura na siyang closely to bato. Kapag no structure naman, nalabian pud ka drain ang imuhang soil. Wala na mabilin nga water. So what are the examples of your or the types of your soil structure? Soil structure are grouped depending on the type, class, and grade. Okay, so what do we mean by type? It refers to the shape of the soil aggregate. Again, pag mo yun kag soil structure, according to type, it refers to the shape. So what are the shape of those aggregates or beds? So it can be granular, platy, crumbly, blocky. Later, makita niyo ang picture sa itong mga types. When you talk about class naman, it refers to the size. So it can be fine, medium, coarse, or dagko ang size sa imong beds. Again, type is to shape, class is to size. And what about the grade? Grade describes how distinct and strong the beds are. So it can be expressed in terms of the cohesion or the attraction within aggregates. So it can be weak, moderate, strong, or structureless. How sila kadikit sa each other? That's what we mean by grade. So a structureless condition, for example, kapag sand, pure sand, it is considered structureless. So, a structureless condition kasi exists when there's no observable degree of aggregation. Like, walay pagkatapo-tapo sa imuhang mga soil separates. So, muna siyang mahitabo sa imong structureless. Now, for example, a full description sa imuhang soil of a given bed could be strong, coarse, prismatic structure. So, strong pasabot grade, coarse pasabot type, main class rather. And then lastly is your type. So, prismatic structure. So, kapag mag-iyong kag soil structure, mauna always si, kung mag-describe kasi mo soil sample, mauna permi si grade ni mo ingon. Next is your class. And then lastly is your type. Say for example, strong, coarse, prismatic structure, or fine, moderate fine granular structure. So, again, imuhang soil structure, ginagamit na siya pag-describe sa imuhang certain soil sample or sa imong bed. So, una dyan na sa order of siyang adjectives. Order of adjective is your grade, next is your class, lastly is your type. So, a structureless soil is characterized to be massive or single grain lang siya. Okay, so muna siya ang illustration, comparison between massive and single grain as well. So, kaning single grain, walay aggregates na na-form. Like, walay secondary beds. Single grain lang yun siya, sa example, yung mga sand. So, it has no structure. Next is your massive na soil. Pag massive na soil, very dako siya na block of soil. So, wala po siya structure. So, what are the examples in terms of type of soil structure? So, first, you have your granular na soil structure. So, granular soil structure are characterized to be cookie crumb-like with around 0.5 centimeters less than in diameter. So, granular structure can be found in surface horizons where roots grow. So, because of its texture, rather its structure, roots can easily spread through your granular soils, and as a result, kapag granular type ang imong soil structure, this type of soil drains water really well and is great for growing plants. So, ang granular soil structure, muna siya ang ideal na soil structure. So, muna ang product kapag after ninyo og bungkal, mo man itong gusto makuha nga type of soil structure. More siyang cookie crumbs yun. Very fine, grano. Enough para makapenetrate ang imong roots, enough po para makahold siya og water, and makadrain po og water nga dili siya very compacted imuhang lupa. Next is your platy na soil structure. Sa type niya, under ni siya sa type nga according to the anong tawag dito? So, ito siya according to the shape sa imong soil structure. Kapag platy, ang itsura sa imong soil structure is it is characterized to be thin, ba siyang mga plato, thin, flat plates that lie horizontally. So, they are common in your compacted soils and poorly drained areas. So, in platy soils kasi, water and air don't move well. So, this can make it hard for plants to grow and thrive. It is common in your E-horizon. So, katong horizon ni mo nga, horizon of leaching. So, asa ni makita mo platy soil? Sa mga lupa nga permi matumban, permi maagian pod og kanang mga sakyanan. Like say for example, nagulan karon tapos magian og sakyanan, medyo compacted gyud mo sa siya nakaplato-plato. So daghan karon na-soil na ang porma tapos ma-compact na pud siya. May mga plates. So how to fix platey soils? Because atong ideal na soil structure is granular kasi in terms of crop preparation or crop production. So to fix flaky soils, it is important to improve drainage and reduce compaction. So you can improve drainage and remove compaction by adding organic matter and regularly aerate nimo imo soil. So imo siyang itil. Pero dili enough nga imo lang siyang itil, you have to incorporate organic matter para dili mo balik ka compact ang imong soil structure. Next is you have blocky. So blocky structure are characterized to be irregular. Na siya mga irregular blocks. Mura na siya og kung imong granular kay cookie crumb like, ang imong blocky kay mura siyang chocolate na ibuak-buak nimo. So usually 1.5 to 5 centimeters in diameter. So your blocky soil structure, makuha nimo ni siya kapag after nimo primary ibungka lang imong lupa tapos daghan siya og clay, dili siya diretso mag-granular, dagko pa siya dagko pa og more siyang naka-blocky ang imong lupa. So in blocky soil kasi water and air movement is still limited. So it is very tough or it is very difficult for your plants to grow. Asa man nato makita again imong blocky soils? Your blocky soils is common in areas with heavy clay type na soil kapag daghan ang iyahang clay component. So, still blocky soils can be managed to improve the structure by incorporating organic matter or your humus para and i-mix nimo siya to other type of soils para dili siya magpabilin nga naka-block siya or masyag ka ng chocolate type, chocolate chips. Next is your prismatic type of soil structure. Prismatic is characterized to have vertical columns of soil that might be centimeters in long, usually found in lower horizons. So, usually found sa mga B and C horizons. OAE, BCR, B and C horizons. So, these columns are shaped like prisms with flat ang iyang top. Now, kani nga mga soil structure, they limit water and root movement. Kay, mura naman gud siya og kahoy ang imuhang lupa. Pero, dili naman ni siya maabot sa lower, sa topmost part sa soil. Nani siya sa mga ubos ka nang dool na sa imuhang root, tawag dito, bedrock. Lastly, you have your columnar. Your columnar is same sa imuhang prismatic. Characterized kapon siya with vertical columns, pero it is distinct in a sense na it has a salt cap at the top because it is usually found in arid climates kapon sa mga init na mga lugar. So we usually find columnar soils in arid or semi-arid regions. Kaya kani nga type of soil is high in sodium which causes the shape and then the formation of kanang mga salt deposits. Similarly, water and air movement through columnar soil is limited. So, this structure is very challenging for plants to grow. So, these are your 5 types of soil structure. So, again, when terms of soil structure, it can be your soil aggregates or your soil beds can be characterized una based sa iyahang grade. So, it can be weak, moderate. Next is the class, and last is the type. So, your soil can be moderate, fine, granular soil, or moderate, medium, granular soil. Next is you have your density. In terms of, wait, I'll have to cut the recording. So, in terms of densities and sa imuhang, we have soil density, soil water, and soil consistency and soil color. We'll have a separate video for that.